All right, in this video, we're going to be going over the appraisal contingency. Why this one's important is because it sets a ceiling in terms of what your lender is able to loan you towards the purchase of a home. One quick aside, but that's relevant, is sometimes people think like, okay, let's say that the lender approves you for $500,000, but the home that you're buying is only $450,000. So it's understandable that you might think like, oh, that's great. So I have $50,000. Could I borrow against that to do any repairs on the house? The short answer is no, unfortunately. The purchase loan, if that's what you're going for, is exactly for that use only, for purchasing the home. So if even though you're approved for more and you get into contract for less, that is what you have access to, and that's going to limit your funds in that regard, right? So that's just kind of a quick aside, but kind of relevant to the whole conversation today about the appraisal. So what the appraisal is once we get a home into contract, the lender will send out an appraiser to go out and assess the value of the home. And the purpose for that is to make sure that we're using kind of market factors in considering the value and not inflating the price unnecessarily. You saw this during the last Great Recession, where there was just some shenanigans, to say the least, of homes being appraised at certain values because there was coordination with folks in the field to value it at that price, but the home didn't actually have that value. So there's been a lot of regulations put into place that kind of help create a bit of a separation between the appraiser and folks like the realtor and the lender to kind of create an unbiased opinion of value on the home. There's a couple of things that go into that. Let me be right back. Magic of video. And I'm back. So as I was saying, there's some criteria that kind of goes into a standard appraisal. And so when we're running the comparative market analysis, myself or anybody on our team, these are the criteria that we're applying because we want to make sure that we're aligning ourselves as closely as possible to the standards that an appraiser is going to apply so that we can feel confident about the advising that we're providing to you with regard to the price. And so the criteria that they're typically looking at is proximity to the home, which is typically about a half-mile radius. If the home is extremely unique, for example, we're about to close on a property that is a completely brand new build, 2021, in a neighborhood that has not had a single new build in the last 20 years. And so realistically, and actually the other criteria that's in here is closing timeline. So there's no comps within that neighborhood. And so we had to go almost 2 miles out, which is not standard practice, to find homes that were built at least within the last 2 years to find some decent comps. At the end of the day, the home ended up appraising for what we offered at, which was much higher than what the other comps were showing, despite the distance. But those were the criteria that had to be used because there was nothing comparable in that neighborhood for the appraiser to use in assessing the value of the home. And so they had to kind of go in a non-traditional route to find comps that supported or that could give them a confident assessment of the value. The other thing is closing timeline. So typically the starting point is about 3 months. So they're also going to look at comps that have closed within 3 months around that property. So within a half mile and close within 3 months. If they're finding that within that half mile criteria, there's not a lot of homes, but there should be, if you extend that time a little bit more, maybe they go back 4 months, maybe all the way up to 6 months. Rarely do they go back a full year. Like I said, in the instance of the example I just gave you, that was a fairly unique circumstance that required kind of a non-traditional approach. But typically they'll go half a mile radius, and the standard price is about 3 months back to kind of see what has sold around that home. I have found myself sometimes in funny conversations with other realtors that cherry pick homes, especially on the buy side, when I'll ask them like, hey, I ran my comps. I can't quite come to the number that you guys are asking for. Can you help me understand your comps? And they'll send me some comps, and when I map them out, they're well outside of that, these kind of standard practices. But because they couldn't find comps within that area, they really reached out. An appraiser won't do that. If there's enough comps within the half mile radius and within the specific timeline, they're not going to go outside of either of those to just justify the price. And so, that'll be things that I'll flag as we're having this conversation, or my team will flag as we're having this conversation around value. The other criteria that they'll look at is typically about 20% difference in square footage going up and down. So if you have 1,000 square foot home, 20% is 200 square feet. So we'll look at homes that are as small as 800 square feet and as large as 1,200 square feet. And so that'll be the range of homes that we're looking at. We're not necessarily kind of quite getting to the bed and the bath, because that'll just kind of be an adjustment of value based on if the home that we're looking at has two bedrooms, two baths, and the home that they're using as a comp has one, then what they're going to do is they're going to add value to that home to bring it up, assuming that it had a second bathroom, right? If the home that they're using as a comp has two bathrooms and the home that we're looking at has one bathroom, they're going to subtract value to based on their assessment of what the value of that extra bathroom is. So that's that. And then the general condition of the home. So this is kind of a very subjective criteria. Some account for it, some don't. But in general, they're not going to necessarily look at something that's a complete fixer and look at that as a true comp versus something that's been fully updated. It just, there's no logic to connect those two. And so those are the kind of criteria that an appraiser is going to be looking at. Why it's important is that, as you can see here, the appraisal sets a ceiling for your loan. And so even if you offer, in our example here, $450,000, and that's what we got into contract on, if the appraiser goes out and based on the comps, they come back and say, hey, I valued it at $425,000. I couldn't find comps that support the $450,000 value. What that does is it creates what's called a gap, an appraisal gap, right? So that's the difference between what we offered and what the appraiser appraised it at. And so then that opens it up to negotiations. You can proactively address this by using something that's called an appraisal gap shortfall guarantee. What that means is the options that you have on this is, one, from the get-go, if it's super competitive, you can't full outright waive your appraisal. What that means, however, is that by waiving your appraisal, you're agreeing to purchase it at your offer price regardless of where it appraises. So that if it does, in this scenario, if you offer $450 and it appraises at $425, you're going to close at $450. So you have to figure out how to bring $25,000 on top of your closing costs, on top of your down payment, to make up that gap. That's what happens when you waive an appraisal, right? So only in scenarios where we are confident that, like, hey, I know they priced it here, but that's really low. My comps show it coming here. Chances of you needing to come out of pocket are very slim, relative to our offer. In that case, maybe we can feel confident and we're good and we waive it. Or you have enough cash on hand where you're like, hey, within a reasonable range, we can cover it. Proactively, what you can also do is offer what's called an appraisal shortfall guarantee. And that caps how much out of pocket you're contributing if there is a shortfall. So think of it this way. Let's say we offer $450,000, but that's kind of higher than what our comps showed. And so we're like, chances of it under appraising are pretty high, so that you're not on the hook for a $25,000 potential gap. You say, hey, we're comfortable if it comes up short to come out of pocket an additional $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, whatever you're comfortable coming to the table with on top of your closing costs and on top of your down payment. We can proactively put that forward. And so that caps. So what that does is that in an instance like this, if you offer a $5,000 appraisal shortfall and it appraises at $425, you're just going to say, okay, so our loan and our down payment is going to be calculated at $425, but we're going to give you the promised $5,000 cash on top of that. So we're going to close at $430, right, with a $5,000 cash contribution from you. If you offer $10,000, then be $10,000, so on and so forth. The good thing about the appraisal shortfall guarantee is that it caps how much additional funds you may be coming out of pocket for. And so you kind of have a little bit of control over that. The good thing too is that you will never exceed the offer price. So let's say hypothetically, we offer $450, it appraises it at $448, so a $2,000 appraisal gap. You will only be coming out of pocket $2,000. That's it, to bring it back to the offer price at $450. If, however, if you offer a $10,000 appraisal gap from the beginning, you're still only going to come out with $2,000 to the cap by the offer price. If you offered that same, the $450 with the $10,000 appraisal gap and then appraised at $425, then you're coming in the full $10,000 out of pocket, right? Because we're still well below the $450, and then ideally the home closes at $435. I get the question a lot. So does that mean they have to accept that lower price? Hypothetically, yes, but legally, no. 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, that is exactly what happens. If we find ourselves in this scenario and we offer an appraisal gap shortfall, everybody's understanding that it could potentially, fall short, and that you're offering this cash contribution on top of all the other expenses, and everybody's comfortable moving forward. I've only heard, talking to my colleagues, one instance where somebody, the seller, they accepted a high offer, kind of knowing that it was a high offer that more than likely wouldn't have comped, where they accepted an appraisal shortfall. I forget what the amount was. And when it appraised far below what they accepted at, even though the buyer was still saying, hey, it's unfortunate, but we're still comfortable coming forward with our appraisal shortfall, the seller said, no, it's not enough. And so they had to go back to the table, and I do believe they ended up figuring it out. This is a scenario that happened for a colleague of mine. And so is it 100% guarantee? No, but it's about 85 to 90% guarantee that we'll be able to proceed under these terms. Right. So that's kind of why it's important from the get-go that we're kind of really taking the time, and that you're leaning on your realtor, myself, or somebody on my team, to really kind of give you a good, honest opinion of value based on the market. And again, it's not cherry picking properties. It's being as honest and intentional as possible to give us a good, concrete understanding of what the value of the property is. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll see you in the next video.